The sky turned red that night, not from a sunset, from fire. November 25th, 1892. Newport, Rhode Island. The ocean wind carried the smell of burning wood, melting paint, and something else. Something that smelled like money dying. On the edge of a cliff where waves had crashed for thousands of years, the most expensive wooden house in America was turning into ash. Cornelius Vanderbilt II stood watching. He was the richest man in the United States. He controlled the railroads. He controlled how goods moved across the entire country. But right now, he couldn't control the flames eating his home. Most people would run away after losing everything. Most people would give up. Cornelius Vanderbilt did something different. He looked at the smoking ruins. He looked at the black wood turning to powder. And according to his family, he said something quiet. Something that would define his family for the next 100 years. We will build again, but this time nothing will burn, never. You've probably seen pictures of the breakers. The big stone mansion that looks like an Italian palace. Tourists walk through it today. They take photos of the gold decorations. They stand by the ocean and smile for their cameras, but they don't know the real story. They don't know that this house isn't just about showing off wealth. It's a tomb. It's a fortress built by a scared man who tried to protect his family from fate, but lost the most important battle of his life. The tour guides tell you about success and beauty and the Gilded Age, but the real story, hidden behind those thick limestone walls, is about how a family that seemed untouchable slowly fell apart. Why would a man with over $2 billion in today's money build a house where it was almost impossible to actually live? A house where even the bathtubs were carved from single pieces of marble, so nothing could ever rot or burn. The answer isn't pride, it's fear, deep, terrible fear, the sad irony. Cornelius was building a forever home for a family that was already breaking apart even before the first stone was put in place. Let's go back to the moment when everything changed. 1893, America was growing fast. Factories everywhere, railroads connecting cities, money flowing like rivers, but also big problems were coming. Cornelius Vanderbilt, grandson of the famous Commodore Vanderbilt, felt the weight of his family name crushing down on him. He wasn't a ruthless businessman like his grandfather. The Commodore had been a fighter, a man who took what he wanted and didn't care who got hurt. Cornelius was different. He was serious, religious. He worked 12 hours every day. He saw his fortune not as a toy, but as a responsibility, like a sacred duty. While other rich heirs spent money on fancy parties in Paris and expensive horses, Cornelius sat in his office at Grand Central Station in New York, working until his eyes hurt. His wife, Alice, matched him perfectly. She was short and strict. She came from an old, respected family that had lost its money generations ago. When Cornelius met her, she was teaching Sunday school. No one could have imagined that this quiet teacher would become Alice of the Breakers, the woman whose word would become law in New York's high society. Together, they were perfect for building something enormous. They didn't want just a summer house. They wanted to create a symbol of stability in a world that was changing too fast. They wanted walls thick enough to keep out all the chaos and danger. To make their dream real, they hired Richard Morris Hunt. He was already a legend. Hunt was called the Dean of American Architecture. He understood their pain after the fire. He had a radical idea. Use steel, stone, brick, and marble. No wood anywhere in the structure, not even a little bit. Even the boiler room, where they heated the house, would be built in an underground bunker hundreds of feet away from the main building. That way, not even a tiny spark could reach the family. It was brilliant engineering. It was also completely insane. Construction was supposed to take just 2 years, thousands of workers, craftsmen brought from Italy and France. tons of marble shipped across the ocean. But as the walls went up higher and higher, something dark was happening to Cornelius himself. If you're still here, you're not looking for simple stories. These kinds of investigations take months of research, and your attention is what makes them possible. No one who saw him inspecting the construction site, holding his cane tightly, knew that his time was running out. He was building a house that would last for centuries, but he himself only had a few years left to live. The Breakers was supposed to be a place where his children and grandchildren would live forever, but fate had different plans. This stone giant would become the stage for one of the saddest human dramas in the history of American wealth. A drama about how even the thickest walls can't protect you from the fragility of human life. To understand the real tragedy of the Breakers, you have to understand the man who created it. Cornelius Vanderbilt II wasn't like his legendary grandfather, the Commodore. If the grandfather was a ruthless predator who tore wealth from the world by force, the grandson was born carrying a heavy burden. He inherited $70 million, which is about $2 billion in today's money, but he didn't see this money as a privilege. He saw it as a sacred duty. He was a man of deep faith and strict discipline. He started every day with prayer. He ended every day checking financial reports. He worked himself to exhaustion. His body was breaking down from stress, but he wouldn't stop. His marriage to Alice became the foundation of this strict philosophy. Alice wasn't a typical socialite who just went to parties and wore fancy dresses. She came from an old, respected family, but before meeting Cornelius, she worked as a simple teacher in Sunday school at St. Bartholomew's Church. Their wedding in 1867 was like a strategic merger in business. The endless resources of the Vanderbilts' new money united with the impeccable reputation and aristocratic taste of the Gwynn family's old money. Alice gave the family what couldn't be bought on the stock exchange: social legitimacy, respect. Planning for the new stone house began in 1893, exactly when America was hit by the worst financial panic in its history. Banks were collapsing. People were starving. Building a palace during this time seemed like madness. But for Cornelius, it was a survival strategy, a declaration of stability. He wasn't fighting for luxury. He was fighting for order. The Breakers was supposed to become an unshakable anchor in the stormy sea of social changes. Cornelius and Alice believed in a great illusion. If you build strong enough walls of stone and steel, the chaos of the outside world can't get inside. It was a desperate attempt to buy eternity, to buy security. They didn't understand yet that they were building a golden cage. The main enemies, sickness and death, were already inside, in the very biology of their family, and no walls could stop them. In 1893, when the ashes of the old house were finally scattered by Atlantic winds, Cornelius Vanderbilt II made his most important alliance. This wasn't a financial contract. This was a creative partnership that would forever change American architecture. He called Richard Morris Hunt. Hunt was already a legend. He was the man who brought the grandeur of French architecture to the United States. Hunt and Vanderbilt were men cut from the same cloth, both aging, both obsessed with perfection, both feeling that this was their last great chance to leave a mark in history. If Cornelius provided the money, Hunt provided the vision. Their strategy was bold. They decided to abandon the popular French shadow style and turn to something older and heavier. They chose the style of 16th-century Italian palaces from Genoa and Turin. The choice was deeply symbolic. Genoa's palaces belonged to merchant princes and bankers who, like the Vanderbilts, controlled the trade routes of their world. It was a way to say without words, we're not new rich people pretending. We're the new aristocracy, equal to the Medici. On the cliff of Ochre Point, the fusion of two completely different worlds began. On one side, ancient European beauty, marble, alabaster, mosaics. On the other side, advanced American engineering. It was a marriage of art and industry. Hunt designed the house not as a traditional home, but as a modern skyscraper laid on its side. The building's skeleton was made of powerful steel beams, the same kind used for building railroad bridges. This was Cornelius's personal guarantee, not a single piece of wood in the load-bearing structures. Even under the luxurious floors were hidden concrete slabs and steel supports. Construction turned into a military operation. The speed was unimaginable for that time. To complete the palace in less than 2 years, hundreds of workers labored around the clock. For the first time in the history of private construction in Newport, electric lighting was used, allowing work at night. Local residents watched in shock as a stone monster grew on the cliff under the bright lights. It was like building a pyramid in ancient Egypt. Marble was shipped from Italy, limestone from Indiana, stone from Canada. The logistics were so complex that they built a temporary railroad right to the construction site just to deliver materials. The partnership between Cornelius and his wife, Alice, revealed itself in this project in a new way. Alice took on the role of controlling the interior world. While her husband dealt with the steel skeleton and the budget, she worked with decorators from a famous firm in Paris. She approved every detail, the color of the velvet, the pattern on the ceiling, everything. It was a fusion of masculine desire for security and feminine aspiration for elegance. Alice understood that this house must become a stage where she would reign. In this union, there was no room for sentiment. Only cold calculation and perfect taste. However, behind the facade of success lurked a growing problem. The Breakers was conceived as a summer cottage, a place to relax, but the scale of the project got completely out of control. The house covered more than 125,000 square feet. It had 70 rooms. 33 of those rooms were just for the servants. This was no longer a house. It was an institution requiring an army to maintain. Neighbors watched this construction with a mixture of admiration and horror. The Vanderbilts were breaking the unwritten rule of Newport's cottage community. Be rich, but be restrained about it. Don't show off too much. They built Versailles in America's backyard. But the most important thing was happening invisibly. Richard Morris Hunt, creating this masterpiece, was dying. He suffered from gout and other painful diseases. Each blueprint came to him with difficulty. Every decision was agony. Cornelius Vanderbilt, paying millions of dollars in bills, also felt his strength leaving him. A stroke was already waiting for him in the near future. Two great men were building a monument to eternity, investing their last vital forces into it. They hurried as if they knew that time was almost up. The Breakers grew with frightening speed, floor by floor, stone by stone, devouring millions of dollars and the health of its creators. It was becoming a stone representation of their race with death. When you pass through the massive gates of the Breakers, gates that stand 9 meters tall, you're not met with hospitality. You're met with overwhelming imperial power. The facade of Indiana limestone rises over the ocean like an impregnable cliff, ignoring the wind and salt spray. Entering the Great Hall, you enter a space that denies human scale, an atrium 14 meters high. The walls are covered in stone that imitates the street facades of an Italian courtyard. Psychologically, you don't feel like you're inside a house. You feel like you're standing in an open city square, vulnerable, small in the face of eternity. This is an exact portrait of Cornelius's soul. The public world has completely swallowed the personal world. Protection has turned into isolation. Move to the dining room, and you'll feel the cold of this grandeur. 12 monolithic columns of red marble from North Africa support the ceiling where goddesses are painted. The table could seat 34 people and was set with gold plates and utensils, but the stone acoustics made intimate conversation impossible. Guests had to almost shout to be heard at the other end. Sound here doesn't sink into softness. It echoes loudly off hard surfaces. Every word bounces back at you. A stark contrast is provided by the morning room, shining with unique panels covered in platinum. Here, in the cold, silvery light of the eastern sun, the family sought rare moments of privacy, but even here, the chairs stood in strict symmetrical order. Not for comfort, for protocol. Before we continue, ask yourself this: what does it mean to win, to have everything and feel nothing? The entire house is a triumph of total control over matter. Bathtubs were carved from solid blocks of marble weighing 1.5 tons each to eliminate any possibility of leaks. Faucets provided both fresh water and seawater, depending on what you wanted. This incredibly complex machine required 40 servants to run it. Invisible shadows living on the 3rd floor, accessible only through separate staircases that the family would never use. The Breakers was created as an ideal world that excluded chaos and chance. Every detail, from the gigantic crystal chandeliers to the copper pots in the two-story kitchen, screamed about the master's power. But paradoxically, there was almost no room left for simple, unregulated life as it actually happens, with its mess and unpredictability and warmth. In August of 1895, the Breakers shone with lights at a grand ball honoring daughter Gertrude's debut into society. It seemed the dream had come true. The perfect house, the perfect family, the perfect moment. But the triumph lasted only that one night. Just a year later, in 1896, Cornelius Vanderbilt II suffered a devastating stroke. The man who built an indestructible fortress against external fire burned out from within due to overwork and stress. The cruel irony of fate: he created a perfect machine for living, but his own body refused to live in it. It was precisely within these flawless walls that the real drama unfolded, the drama that would split the family apart. While Cornelius's body weakened, his will remained as hard as iron, but that iron will turned into tyranny. His eldest son and main heir, Cornelius III, committed an unforgivable sin in his father's eyes. He fell in love with Grace Wilson, a socialite whom the parents considered a calculating woman who just wanted the Vanderbilt money. The conflict between father and son reached its peak under the vaults of the Breakers. The dying magnate, barely able to move, issued an ultimatum. "Either obey me or you're out of this family." The son chose love. He married Grace against his father's will. In response, Cornelius, whose hand could barely hold a pen anymore, rewrote his will. He effectively disinherited his firstborn son. He reduced his inheritance to a humiliating minimum and passed the title of family head to his younger brother, Alfred. This was a moment of deep moral complexity. The creator of the family temple personally destroyed family unity for the sake of his principles. For the sake of control, Alice, torn between duty to her husband and maternal love for her son, was forced to side with the dying tyrant. This decision forever changed her relationship with Cornelius III. The last 3 years of his life, Cornelius spent in the Breakers not as a lord but as an elite prisoner. Servants wheeled him in a wheelchair through the marble halls that were too vast for one sick man. He gazed at the Atlantic through panoramic windows, protected from storms but utterly isolated from life. From real human connection, the great house, intended to be a symbol of the family's immortality, turned into a golden coffin for its creator even before his physical death. If that image disturbs you, that disturbance is the point. Some truths need to be uncomfortable. The death of Cornelius Vanderbilt II in 1899 wasn't just the end of one man's life. It became the beginning of the slow agony of an entire era. Widow Alice was left alone in the 70-room labyrinth. For 35 years, she became the guardian of a dying ritual. While the outside world changed rapidly, automobiles appeared, jazz music filled the streets, women fought for their rights inside the breakers, time stood completely still. Alice continued to change outfits 7 times a day. She demanded full table settings even when dining alone. Servants had to set the table for 34 people, even though only one person would eat. This was no longer luxury. This was desperate resistance to chaos, a refusal to accept that the world had moved on. But the real blow, which shook the house's foundation more than any fire ever could, came not from flames but from new laws and geopolitics. In 1913, the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution was adopted, introducing the federal income tax. The golden stream of money that sustained the palace's upkeep began to dry up. Suddenly, maintaining a 70-room palace with 40 servants became financially crushing. And in 1915, a tragedy occurred that finally destroyed the dynastic dreams forever. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, the son whom Cornelius had appointed as the main heir instead of the prodigal firstborn, died. He was aboard the ocean liner Lusitania when it was hit by a German torpedo during World War I. Witnesses said that Alfred gave his life jacket to a woman with a child, knowing that he couldn't swim. The heir to an empire built on ruthlessness and calculation died as a hero, sacrificing himself for a stranger. The ocean, which the breakers' windows had gazed upon for years, took the one who was meant to own that view. After Alice's death in 1934, the house passed to the younger daughter, Gladys, Countess Szechenyi. By that time, the breakers had become an economic monster eating money. The Great Depression destroyed the fortunes of the neighbors. Newport's palaces were demolished one after another, or turned into cheap boarding houses because no one could afford to pay property taxes and maintain staffs of servants. The breakers stood closed, furniture covered with white sheets like ghosts, like a giant tomb. The question was stark. Sell the land to developers who would demolish it, or find a new purpose for this colossus. It was here that the main transformation occurred. Gladys, raised in a golden cage, did what her father could never even imagine. She realized that the only way to save the family legacy was to give it away. She stopped seeing the breakers as private property. She saw it as a historical document, something that belonged to everyone. In 1948, in the middle of the post-war reshaping of the world, she took an unprecedented step. She leased the mansion to the newly created Preservation Society of Newport County for a symbolic sum. $1 a year. This was the moment of truth. The iron gates, created to keep strangers out, swung open to the public. What had been built as an exclusive fortress for the elite became a museum for everyone. Elitism was sacrificed for survival. The ambition of ownership transformed into a mission of preservation. The stone giant survived only because it stopped being a home and became a symbol. Today, when you stand on the upper terrace of the breakers and look at the Atlantic Ocean, you see the same landscape that the paralyzed Cornelius Vanderbilt II saw in his final days. But the context has changed completely and forever. What was built as America's most private fortress became Rhode Island's most public museum. Every year, more than 400,000 tourists pass through the same doors that once admitted only the select few from the highest ranks of society. The story of the breakers is essentially a real-life version of The Great Gatsby, only told to the very end. If J. Gatsby built a mansion to reclaim the past and one woman, Vanderbilt built to secure the future and an entire dynasty. Both suffered defeat in the face of unstoppable time. Gatsby died from a bullet. Vanderbilt's dream dissolved in taxes, inheritance laws, and social changes he couldn't control. The paradox of this house is that it survived only because the family acknowledged its defeat in the attempt to maintain it single-handedly. Today, the third floor of the house remains closed to the public. Descendants of the Vanderbilt family still stay there during summer visits. This creates a surreal picture. Downstairs, tourists in shorts and t-shirts photograph the dining room where meals were once served on gold plates, while upstairs, right above their heads, the great-great-grandchildren of the house's creator live in the modern world, hidden from view. This is a living metaphor of how democracy swallowed aristocracy. The palace remained, but its inhabitants retreated to the attic of history. The lesson of the breakers is frighteningly relevant to us today. We live in an era of a new Gilded Age. Tech billionaires build survival bunkers and plan trips to Mars. They buy islands. They create private compounds. Cornelius Vanderbilt II proved that you can conquer the element of fire by building a house of stone and steel. You can buy the best marble from Italy. You can hire the world's greatest architects. You can spend $2 billion adjusted for inflation. But you cannot build a wall that will protect you from inner emptiness, from family conflict, from loss of meaning, from the basic fragility of being human. When you leave the mansion's grounds, pay attention to the waves crashing against the rocks below. Those waves gave the house its name, breakers, breaking waves. They're the only thing here that cost nothing. They're the only thing that will exist when even this stone turns to dust. Cornelius Vanderbilt wanted to leave eternity behind him, and he succeeded, but not at all as he planned. He didn't leave us a monument to his power. He left us a majestic reminder of human fragility. He built a house that would never burn. But history has shown that the most important things in life, children's love, health, peace of mind, they burn up instantly, and no amount of marble can hold them. The workers who built the breakers, the hundreds of Italian stonemasons and French craftsmen, they left no names behind. History doesn't remember them, but their hands created every column, every carved ceiling, every perfectly fitted stone. They worked day and night under electric lights, a technology so new it seemed like magic. They built this monument to one family's fear. And when they finished, they went home to their own small houses, their own families, their own simple lives. Were they happier than Cornelius Vanderbilt? Did they sleep better in their modest beds than he did in his marble palace? We'll never know, but we do know they weren't paralyzed by stroke in a 70-room prison of their own creation. The invisible people of the breakers haunt its halls more than any ghost story. The 40 servants who lived on the third floor, the cooks who prepared elaborate meals, the maids who dusted the platinum panels, the groundskeepers who maintained the acres of gardens. They had names, they had dreams, they had their own stories of love and loss and hope. But when tourists walk through today, they see only the gold and the marble and the ocean view. They don't see the separate staircases the servants had to use, so the family would never have to encounter them. They don't see the tiny rooms under the roof where people slept after working 60-hour days. They don't think about the complex hierarchy among the staff, the careful dance of who served what and when and how. This wasn't just a house. It was a small society with its own rules and classes and power structures. The Vanderbilts were the kings and queens. The servants were the invisible kingdom that made the fantasy possible. And when the family fortune couldn't sustain it anymore, those servants were the first to go. They scattered to find work elsewhere. The breakers fell silent. The machine stopped running. One of the great ironies is that the preservation of the breakers as a museum created new jobs. Tour guides, maintenance workers, security guards, gift shop attendants, the house still employs people. But now they work for the public, not for a single family. The power dynamic has completely reversed. The question that haunts every visitor who thinks deeply about this place is simple and devastating. What is this all for? Cornelius Vanderbilt II worked himself to death for this. Richard Morris Hunt poured his dying energy into designing it. Thousands of workers spent years building it. Millions of dollars, an incomprehensible amount of wealth, went into creating it. All to what end? To prove that one family was above nature, to create a fortress against fire, to establish a dynasty that would last forever. And none of it worked. The dynasty crumbled within 2 generations. The fortress became a cage. The proof of superiority became proof of folly. Or maybe, just maybe, there's another way to look at it. Maybe the failure was the point. Maybe we needed this monument to excessive wealth precisely so we could learn from it. So we could walk through its cold marble halls and feel the absence of warmth. So we could stand in its enormous dining room and hear the echoes of lonely voices. So we could look at its impenetrable walls and understand that some things can't be kept out. Fear, loss, death, change, these things seep through even the thickest stones. The breakers stands today not as a triumph but as a cautionary tale. It whispers to us across more than a century. It says, be careful what you build, be careful what you value. Be careful what you sacrifice in the pursuit of security, because in the end, the waves keep breaking against the rocks. The wind keeps blowing, the world keeps changing, and no amount of marble can stop any of it. If you've made it this far in this story, you understand something important. That wealth without wisdom is just weight. That power without connection is just isolation. That building walls to keep out danger also keeps out life. The tourists who visit the breakers usually spend about an hour there. They take their photos. They marvel at the opulence. Then they leave and go have ice cream on the Newport waterfront. They return to their normal lives, their modest homes, their families and friends and daily struggles. Are they poorer than the Vanderbilts? In dollars, absolutely. In every other way that matters. That's the question worth asking. Cornelius Vanderbilt II had everything money could buy. Everything except what he needed most. He had security but no peace. He had power but no happiness. He had an eternal monument but no one to share it with in the way that mattered. The last years of his life, paralyzed and bitter, watching his son's rebellion, feeling his body betray him despite all his efforts at control, those years must have been agonizing. Did he look around at his perfect stone house and wonder if it was all worth it? Did he wish, even for a moment, that he had built something smaller, simpler, warmer? We'll never know what thoughts passed through his mind as servants wheeled him through those enormous halls. But we can guess, because we're all human, and all humans, when facing death, think about the same things. Not about their houses or their wealth or their accomplishments, but about love, about connection, about whether they mattered to the people who mattered to them. And on those measures, Cornelius Vanderbilt II's life was a tragedy. He alienated his firstborn son. He turned his wife into a fellow prisoner of protocol. He built a stage for family life, but forgot to write a script that anyone wanted to perform. The breaking of the Vanderbilt family wasn't caused by fire or financial panic or even death. It was caused by emotional coldness. By putting principles above people, by valuing control over compassion, that's the real secret hidden in the breakers' 70 rooms. Not a secret about wealth or architecture or American history. A secret about what happens when you mistake a fortress for a home. Alice Vanderbilt lived in the breakers for 35 years after her husband's death. 35 years of changing clothes 7 times a day for no one. 35 years of elaborate table settings for meals eaten alone. 35 years of maintaining a ritual that had lost all meaning. Was she happy? The historical record suggests not. She was dutiful, she was proper, she was the perfect aristocratic widow. But happiness, that seems to have escaped her just as surely as it escaped her husband. Their daughter Gladys, who eventually inherited the house, had the wisdom they lacked. She understood that holding on too tightly destroys what you're trying to save. By opening the breakers to the public, by transforming it from private possession into shared heritage, she gave it the only kind of immortality that actually works. Today, the breakers lives because it belongs to everyone. It survives because it serves a purpose beyond one family's ego. It matters because it teaches a lesson that every generation needs to learn. That lesson is uncomfortable but essential. The lesson is this: you cannot build your way to safety. You cannot control your way to happiness. You cannot isolate your way to peace. The only real security comes from connection, from community, from accepting that you're part of something larger than yourself, and that your fate is tied to others' fates. Cornelius Vanderbilt II tried to separate his family from the chaos of the world. He built walls to keep danger out. But in doing so, he also kept out life, joy, spontaneity, the messy, unpredictable, beautiful reality of being human among other humans. The breakers is beautiful, undeniably, breathtakingly beautiful. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The materials are the finest in the world. The design is brilliant, but it's a cold beauty, a beauty that impresses but doesn't comfort, a beauty that says look at me, but never says welcome home. Compare that to the tiny cottages of the workers who built it, those modest homes with their small rooms and simple furnishings, families crammed together around dinner tables, sharing stories and laughter, children playing in yards barely bigger than the breakers' entrance hall, couples growing old together in houses that creaked and leaked and needed constant repair. Which houses held more love? Which ones heard more laughter? Which ones were actually homes instead of monuments? The answer is obvious and painful and necessary to understand. If this story has made you reflect on what you value, what you're building in your own life, then it's served its purpose. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. The preservation of the breakers tells us something hopeful too. It tells us that even our worst mistakes can become our greatest teachers, that even monuments to folly can serve wisdom. That failure, when honestly examined, is more valuable than success when hidden behind walls. Every year, 400,000 people walk through the breakers and learn something. Maybe they learn about architecture or history or the Gilded Age, but if they're paying attention, they learn something deeper. They learn about the limits of wealth, about the cost of isolation, about what really matters when everything else is stripped away. The house stands as a testament not to the Vanderbilt family's power, but to their humanity, to their flaws and fears and failures. And in that honesty, in that vulnerability, there's something beautiful that no amount of marble could create. Cornelius Vanderbilt II built the breakers to prove that his family was untouchable, to show that they had conquered nature and circumstance and fate. But what the house actually proved was the opposite, that all humans, no matter how wealthy, are fragile, that all families, no matter how powerful, can break, that all fortresses, no matter how strong, eventually crumble or become something else entirely. The waves below the breakers have been breaking against those rocks for millions of years. They'll break there for millions more. Long after the last stone of the house has weathered away, those waves will still be there, constant, Unstoppable, indifferent to human ambition, there's a strange comfort in that, in knowing that some things are bigger than us. That nature doesn't care about our money or our plans or our carefully constructed defenses, that the ocean will outlast even our most permanent creations. Maybe that's what Cornelius Vanderbilt II needed to understand but never could, that the goal isn't to conquer nature or control fate or build walls against time. The goal is to accept your place in the flow of things, to build what you can while you can, to love who you love without trying to control them, to live fully in the knowledge that nothing lasts forever, and that's okay. The Breakers is a monument to a man who couldn't accept that. And so it became, ironically, the perfect illustration of exactly that truth. As you think about this story, about this magnificent, tragic, beautiful, sad house on the cliff, ask yourself what you're building in your own life. Are you building walls or bridges? Are you building fortresses or homes? Are you trying to control the future or embrace the present? Because in 100 years, whatever you build will be someone else's museum or someone else's memory or someone else's lesson. The question is what lesson it will teach. Will it teach that you loved, that you connected, that you opened your doors and your heart? Or will it teach that you feared, that you isolated, that you built walls to keep the world out and ended up keeping yourself in? The Breakers has taught millions of people its lesson, the lesson of beautiful, tragic failure, the lesson of wealth without wisdom, the lesson of power without peace. What lesson will your life teach? The gates of the Breakers are open now. Anyone can walk through. Anyone can see the marble and the gold and the ocean view. But the real treasure isn't in the house. It's in understanding what the house represents, what it cost, what it couldn't buy, what it taught through its failure to achieve what it set out to do. Cornelius Vanderbilt II wanted to build something that would never burn. He succeeded. The Breakers has survived fire, depression, wars, social upheaval. The stones still stand, but everything that mattered, everything that made a house a home, burned away anyway. Love burned away in the conflict between father and son. Health burned away in the stress of constant work. Peace burned away in the obsession with control. Connection burned away in the isolation of wealth. The house stands, but the life it was meant to contain vanished like smoke. And that's the final, devastating lesson of the Breakers. That you can protect the container but not the contents, that you can preserve the form but not the meaning, that you can build monuments that last centuries, but you can't keep the things that actually matter from slipping through your fingers. The wind off the Atlantic blows through Newport today, just as it did in 1895. The waves break against the rocks just as they always have. The Breakers stands on the cliff, magnificent and cold, and eternally teaching its lesson to anyone wise enough to truly see it. But there's one more layer to this story, one more secret that makes the tragedy even more complete. In the summer of 1934, just months before Alice Vanderbilt died, something strange happened at the Breakers. A young servant girl, newly hired, was cleaning the morning room, the platinum-covered walls, the east-facing windows. As she polished the ornate furniture, she found something tucked behind a loose panel near the fireplace. A letter written in Cornelius Vanderbilt II's own handwriting, dated March 18, 1898. 1 year before his death, the letter was never sent, never sealed, never addressed to anyone. It was just words on paper, hidden away like a confession that could never be spoken aloud. The servant girl, not knowing what to do, brought it to Alice. The old woman, now in her 80s, sat in her wheelchair and read her dead husband's words for the first time in 36 years. Witnesses said she wept, the only time anyone had ever seen Alice of the Breakers cry. What did the letter say? The servant girl, years later, remembered fragments. She couldn't read all of it. She had only glimpsed it before handing it over. But certain lines stayed with her forever. I have built a fortress that has become my prison. I wanted to protect my family, but I have only succeeded in building walls between us. The stone is perfect, the marble is flawless, but I would trade every piece of it for one honest conversation with my son. Alice maintains the standards I demanded, but I see now that I demanded the wrong things. I asked for perfection when I should have asked for forgiveness. This house will stand for centuries, but what does that matter if no one loves living in it? The servant claimed there was more. Much more, pages of regret and realization. But Alice Vanderbilt, after reading it, did something unexpected. She walked slowly, painfully, to the fireplace in that same morning room, and she burned the letter. Watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. When the servant asked why, Alice said only this: "Some truths are too late to matter. Is this story true?" Historians debate it. There's no official record of the letter. The servant's account wasn't written down until the 1960s, decades after the event. It might be legend, it might be myth, but whether the letter existed or not, the sentiment it expressed was real. Cornelius Vanderbilt II spent his final years trapped in the consequences of his own choices. And no amount of marble could change that. The question is, why do we need to believe this letter existed? Why does the story persist even without proof? Because it gives us something we desperately want. It gives us the hope that even the most rigid, controlling, fearful person can have a moment of clarity, a moment of seeing the truth. It suggests that Cornelius, at the end, understood what he had done, that he recognized his mistake even if he couldn't fix it. We want to believe in deathbed wisdom, in last-minute realizations, in the possibility that it's never too late to see clearly, even if it's too late to change anything. Maybe that's the real purpose of stories like The Breakers, not to judge the people who lived there, but to learn from them while we still have time. While our own walls are still being built, while we can still choose differently, there's another character in this story who deserves attention. Someone we haven't talked much about yet. Gertrude Vanderbilt, the daughter whose debut ball in 1895 seemed to mark the peak of the family's success. Gertrude was different from her parents. She was artistic, creative, rebellious in quiet ways. While her mother obsessed over protocol and her father obsessed over control, Gertrude dreamed of something else. She wanted to be a sculptor, an artist. Her parents tolerated this as a hobby, a charming eccentricity for a wealthy young woman. They never imagined she was serious. They certainly never imagined she would become one of the most important patrons of American art in the 20th century. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, as she became after marriage, used her inherited wealth to do something her father never could. She opened doors instead of closing them. She founded the Whitney Museum of American Art. She supported struggling artists. She gave away her money to create beauty that belonged to everyone, not just her family. In a way, Gertrude did for art what her sister Gladys later did for the Breakers itself. She took private wealth and made it public good. She understood what her father didn't, that the only legacy worth leaving is one that serves others. Gertrude rarely returned to the Breakers after she grew up. She found it oppressive, suffocating. She built her own spaces, artist studios, and galleries where people could create freely. Where the walls existed to protect art, not to isolate people, the contrast is striking. Cornelius built the Breakers as a fortress. Gertrude built museums as gathering places. He used wealth to separate. She used it to connect. He tried to control the future. She tried to inspire it. If you understand the difference between these two approaches, you understand everything. And there's one final twist to the story. something that brings us full circle to where we began, with fire. In 2011, more than a century after the original wooden breakers burned down, the breakers faced another threat. Not fire this time, but something almost as destructive, Hurricane Irene. The storm surge brought waves crashing over the cliff wall. Water flooded the lower levels. The carefully maintained gardens were destroyed. For the first time since it was built, the breakers seemed vulnerable. The staff worked frantically to protect the artifacts, to move furniture to higher floors, to seal doors against the water. And in that moment, tourists who happened to be sheltering nearby in Newport helped. Strangers formed a chain to pass sandbags. Regular people worked alongside museum employees to save Cornelius Vanderbilt's monument. The house survived, but not because of its thick walls, because of human cooperation, because of community effort, because strangers cared enough about a shared cultural treasure to work together to protect it. The irony would have been lost on Cornelius, but it's perfect for us. The fortress he built to keep others out was saved by letting others in. The monument to one family's isolation survived through collective action. After the hurricane, the Preservation Society set up a fund for repairs. Thousands of small donations came in, $5 here, $20 there. Regular people contributing what they could to restore a mansion built by people who wouldn't have let them through the front door. This is what inheritance actually looks like, not money passing from parent to child, but values and lessons passing from generation to generation. The breakers belongs to all of us now, and we all have a stake in what it teaches. What does it teach? That's up to each person who walks through. Some see only beauty and wish they could live that way. Some see only excess and feel angry. Some see tragedy and feel sad. But the wisest visitors see a mirror. They see their own lives reflected in those marble halls, their own fears about security, their own struggles with control, their own questions about what matters most, because here's the truth that connects us across 130 years. We're all building something. Maybe not a mansion, maybe just a life, a career, a family, a reputation, but we're all building, and we all have to choose what we're building for. Are we building to impress others or to shelter those we love? Are we building walls or homes? Are we building monuments to our fears or celebrations of our hopes? Cornelius Vanderbilt II made his choice. He built for permanence, for protection, for control. And he got exactly what he built. A permanent structure that protected nothing that mattered and controlled no one who counted. The question isn't whether he was a good man or a bad man. He was a human being, complex and flawed, and trying his best with the understanding he had. The question is whether we can learn from his mistakes without repeating them. Can we build lives that are strong but not rigid, protective but not isolating, lasting but not suffocating? Can we create spaces that people want to stay in, not just buildings that will physically endure? Can we measure success by the warmth we create rather than the walls we erect? These aren't easy questions. They weren't easy in 1895, and they're not easy now, but they're the right questions. The questions that matter. The Breakers stands on its cliff, asking these questions to every person who visits. Most people don't hear them. They're too busy taking photos and marveling at the gold. But some people hear. Some people stand in that cold dining room and feel the absence of love. Some people walk through those perfect halls and sense the loneliness. Some people look at those impregnable walls and understand what was kept out along with the danger. If you're one of those people, this story was for you. If you felt something shift while reading this, if you thought about your own walls, your own fortresses, your own fears, then you've received the gift that Cornelius Vanderbilt never meant to give, but gave anyway, the gift of seeing clearly, of understanding the cost of safety purchased at the price of life itself. As the sun sets over Newport today, the breakers casts a long shadow across the cliff. Inside, the last tour group of the day shuffles through the music room, the billiard room, the various bedrooms. They'll leave soon, out through the gift shop, back to their cars and their regular lives. The doors will lock. The lights will dim, and the breakers will stand there in the darkness, exactly as it has for over 125 years, waiting for tomorrow's visitors, waiting to teach its lesson one more time. But out here, beyond the gates, life continues. Messy, chaotic, unpredictable, beautiful life. People fall in love in cheap apartments. Families laugh together in small houses. Children play in yards that wouldn't fit in the breaker's entrance hall. And all of that ordinary, unprotected, vulnerable life, is worth more than all the marble in Newport. That's what Cornelius Vanderbilt II learned too late, if he learned it at all. That's what the letter hidden behind the panel might have said, if it existed. That's what Alice understood when she burned those words, if she ever read them. Some truths are too painful to speak aloud. But they echo anyway, through empty halls, across decades, into the hearts of people who are willing to listen. The Breakers is more than a house. It's a whisper from the past, a warning, a gift. Listen carefully, and you'll hear what it's saying. Build your walls if you must, but leave the doors unlocked. Create your fortress if you need to, but fill it with people who make it a home. Protect yourself if you're afraid, but don't let protection become isolation. And remember, always remember, that the waves keep breaking. The wind keeps blowing, time keeps moving, no matter how perfect your palace, no matter how flawless your marble. No matter how thick your walls, in the end, the only thing that lasts is how you made people feel. The only inheritance that matters is the love you gave. The only monument worth building is the one carved in the hearts of people who will remember you not for what you owned, but for who you were. Cornelius Vanderbilt II built the Breakers to prove his family's permanence. Instead, he proved their impermanence. He built it to demonstrate his power. Instead, he demonstrated his vulnerability. He built it to secure his legacy. Instead, he secured ours, because now we walk through his empty halls and learn. We see his mistakes and choose differently. We feel his loneliness and vow to do better. The Breakers failed at its original purpose, and in that failure it found a greater purpose. It became a teacher instead of a fortress, a lesson instead of a legacy, and perhaps, in some way Cornelius never imagined, that makes it exactly what it needed to be. The gates are open now. They've been open for 76 years. They'll stay open for as long as people care enough to keep them that way. Walk through them, learn what they teach, then go home to your own imperfect, beautiful, ordinary life and live it fully. That's what the Breakers is really asking of you, not to admire it, but to learn from it, and then to live differently than the man who built it. That's the inheritance we all share now, the gift of hindsight, the blessing of seeing clearly what he could never see. Use it well. The waves are still breaking, and that's exactly as it should be.